Hello. Is that Rekha ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Uma Shankar sir hasn't joined yet. Or he's not available right
Sorry,
now.
sir.
He's muted.
Hello. Hi,
Hello
Karthik.
sir. Hello sir. Karthik this side.
Hi, sir.
Sir, my name is Karthik Swaroop. I'm a director in Crystal Balaji, which is a 200 KLPD ethanol plant in Muzaffarnagar, Uttar Pradesh. Also, good evening to all the distinguished members of GEMA. Today we have amongst us Mr. Uma Shankar Triplican Dwarakanathan, who's a senior manager in Invest India with over 7 years of experience in the oil and gas sector, LNG liquefaction, project management, risk management, and consulting. The agenda, sir, for today's meeting will be carbon credit, as you know, and its importance in the ethanol industry and India's path to sustainable development. So, sir, over to you. I would like you to shed some light on this matter. Thank you.
I think thanks a lot, Karthik, for the kind introduction. I think I'm with a lot of. I feel that I finally reached a group of friends who we can talk about this topic that is shaping the way fuel is being delivered to people in India. Good that we have touched base on this. Just before, say, I share any presentation, just a brief look at some of the challenges and sort of the achievements that you've had as a result. So I think we are seeing a growth in fuel consumption, say, for petrol and vehicles that are being used with petrol. And as a result, there is a growth in this ethanol segment. And I think you're all well aware of this. However, the reason why we are discussing this particular topic, and I think this will become clearer as we go through the slides also, is um, we hope to address the fact that globally there is a certain way the ethanol industry operates. There are certain benefits the ethanol producers get. Domestically, there are some of these benefits that get highlighted. Now we are looking to find if we can have parity in the sense how global policies behave, how the global ethanol industry operates, and how the Indian ethanol industry can respond. And I'm very glad the folks, Rekha ma'am and the people in GEMA are kind enough to invite me to share these insights with you. So I will just quickly sort of share my slides. And in case there are any sort of queries, we can cover some of the
Yes, sir. We
initial
can
material and we can discuss
we can
those.
do the Q&A after that.
Sure.
Sir.
So I think what we are seeing here, uh, I think I'll just. Uh, so first uh, step in sort of looking at this is that initially, I think typically a lot of the percentage of ethanol that is in fuel tanks, which used to be say around 4 to 5% earlier, say around 2014, 15, has now grown to almost 20%. So now, if you look at, I mean, personally for me, when I go out and travel on the roads and I see a vehicle that says petrol on the tank, now I think it's petrol plus ethanol on the tank. So every vehicle that I see, I imagine 20% of the tank volume being ethanol. So this thinking has fundamentally changed how the industry will respond, because now we have a bit of a balance of say 80% is traditional oil and gas and 20% is with the ethanol industry with various sources. And the future of this industry also lies in the hands of many such grain ethanol producers. So if we take a deep dive into this, how this sort of started. So there was a energy strategy for the country, which was written as part of the national biofuels policy, which sort of looks at how there is a lot of demand for fuel, but it requires certain substitution, say with fuels like ethanol. And there is a need for increasing our domestic production because globally we are now on par with some of the peers like US, Brazil, who also make ethanol to able to compete in terms of volume. Now, for this, the steps that were considered were adding biofuels and renewables. And this is sort of where we are in the last 10 years, where biofuels have become a significant part of our daily fuel mix. And in this has led to some concerns around energy efficiency and how the vehicles are operating and how the fuel blenders are able to procure these, which are, I think, the daily life of how a lot of the ethanol manufacturers here are involved in. And it has also changed the way traditionally how the oil and gas industry had certain refineries sourcing crude. Now they issue tenders for buying ethanol, and they are constantly trying to find the best ways to move them from across one part of the country to the other. So this is sort of a cycle that will continue. So what started as a way forward for the ethanol industry has now become a leaderboard benchmark on how biofuels is growing in the country. So for us also, it's a lot of strategic importance, as we are the backbone of the Indian economy has been and will be sort of the agriculture industry. So the agriculture, the farmers that are involved are sort of the backbone of our economy. So that way, this is a very nice way to build a bridge between how we can use the leverage this industry to double farmers' income, to reduce the imports of crude, to create jobs in remote locations also, and how to create value from some of the waste that is also there in the country. Now, this is sort of also supporting some of the ways in which you can utilize some of the land in the country that was previously, say, kept fallow or not being utilized. So it's a sort of a sustainable development model where what used to be called as a food crop is now a food and an energy crop. And that being said, what the impact it creates, and I think this is where often we look at sort of the day-to-day working and how many liters you have sold or what is the capex of projects, but we are also creating jobs and a vibrant sector that effectively is coming to even everyone's houses in terms of how people are aware that if I have to go out now, I go to a station that is say E20 that has E20%, or it's different, it has slightly lesser. So everybody has a sort of way of seeing that this is a part parcel of their daily life. Now, how was this policy sort of structured? So we discussed some of the goals of this policy. This policy was initially targeting, say, 20% ethanol at a much later date. But then, since the ethanol industry and the members here who have been very kind enough to put such capacity on the table, they have increased the production of ethanol to such an extent that we are now in this year only looking to that time, say in a few months, when we will hit the 20% blending target. Now, once that is there, there is a few other sectors that are also following suit. So one after the other, the biogas sector is now the next sector that is taking a keen interest. And all the sugar mills and all the CBG folks also are sitting close to the sources of the biomass, which can be made into CBG. So this is the next sort of the bigger brother of ethanol is followed by the smaller brother with CBG. And also there is a bit of focus on using alternative feedstock for making, say, 2G ethanol. Now, this is something that is also attracting the attention of many of the ethanol companies because there is a lot of interest in utilizing all the feedstock from the farmer. So, be it the top of the grain or also the rice straw. And we are seeing even tendering activity for this coming up. Now, what this is also leading to is a scheme where this is an industry with allows 100% FDI. And this is of keen interest to investors because the oil and gas industry may have a lot of titans of the industry like IOCL, BPCL, HPCL already operational who are working with a lot of the companies. But when we talk to foreign companies who say we want to enter an Indian market and show us investable opportunities, the ethanol industry is definitely there. Then there is a bit of focus from the government on interest subvention. So what we are seeing here is to support this industry, there was a lot of financial support given in the form of an interest subvention scheme with DFPD taking the lead on this. Now, what we are seeing as a result is a lot of plants, almost 1,200 distilleries are now part of this scheme where they are trying to obtain support with DFPD support for banking and also lower cost of capital. Now we feel that this is a very positive scheme to sort of incentivize this sector, and it's valid for say 5 years. So these companies get that initial support to start their production, stabilize their cash flows, and be able to establish the right kind of ecosystem with farmers. Now, how this whole product is sort of purchased, and I think this is where a lot of the push within the industry is also there. For ethanol, it's under the APM, which you are all well aware of in terms of how the pricing for ethanol is there. So this is a constant now. This is the next set of concerns I think that also come up, which we can discuss on what would be the best pricing of the damaged food grain based ethanol or maize based ethanol. So this is what we are also seeing as the next frontier, where due to these schemes and due to the existing, say, MSP on grain, what could be the effective ethanol price and how that will change in the future? Because once the 20% blending is sort of set, the tendering activity for ethanol will continue. To put it simply, if there is any volatility or change in pricing of the grain and the agricultural yield on a bad year, say with bad rains, how will the ethanol industry deal with it? And what will be the steps that can help them sort of keep the volume of ethanol that they're blending and the price that they're paying to farmers at a level that makes sense for all the players involved? Now, additionally, to support these schemes, there are state level interventions, say between Bihar state, UP state, Assam state, where every state is looking to add a certain level of incentive to incentivize this industry. And I think you folks have also seen this, where a lot of ethanol companies have to deliver ethanol between states, which is a very interesting scenario, because if the state has existing sourcing of grain and existing ethanol demand due to the availability of petrol bunks and depots, they can definitely be able to source the grain from within the state with incentives for domestic producers to be able to produce within the state, because it saves a lot of the logistics cost also for certain interstate transfers. So these are some of the steps that we're seeing, that some of the states like Andhra may have very high ethanol production and because the rice belt, whereas if you see some other states, there may not be so much ethanol capacity, but if given the right set of incentives, more people can set up grain-based ethanol manufacturing in those states. Now, this is sort of the broad context of where the policy was intended and what incentives were coming in. Now, to sort of follow this up, what did it help achieve? So, we started a policy, there was a set of incentives to support the industry. We saw that the sort of increase in ethanol blending went from almost 1.5% to 15% in August 24. And now the numbers are even closer towards 20 in the last few months. So every month on month, PPSC submits the data on how there is a lot of ethanol blending happening. And what this has created is that a lot of retail outlets, say out of the 90,000 plus retail outlets, 15 to 16,000 retail outlets have E20 now, which will only go up. The vision that the minister has also reiterated multiple times, that we want E20 at all retail outlets, is growing. And this is the sort of achievement where uh, there is still some distance to go in terms of how the ethanol production will cater to the demands of the industry overall. Now, how much was paid to farmers as a result? So, what was the sort of on the buy side? So, when you were able to buy the grain, how much money was paid extra to farmers? Almost 87,000 crores was conveyed to farmers. So, they have a bit of a steady cash flow from the ethanol industry. And even if you see the tendering process, it sort of follows suit after the sugarcane harvest season is completed from October to November. That is the time when the tendering activities will start. So this industry is closely linked to how the farmers are also able to produce the sugarcane and grain in the country. Now, there are some aspects on food safety and how this is causing some concern. So we've seen a common sort of question coming up, that how does it influence food security? Now, there is a lot of push from the government to become a large grain storer. So, in the sense, we want to store a lot of grain in the country and reduce the wastage from farm to table. Now, I think there is going to be a lot of this focus coming in where the government will take some initiatives to store the grain, as well as ethanol plants themselves also are starting to store more and more grain. So the effective utilization of grain is coming up on one front. The second is every FCI go down has a certain level of wastage that gets accumulated every year. We have found a way to utilize it. So the ethanol sector offers a two-pronged solution. On one, assuring cash flows to farmers, and on the other side, ensuring that even damaged food grain gets consumed. So this is where we are seeing that this, if you look at it from if you take a bit of a step back and say there is grain being produced and there's grain being consumed, if you can create a small set of consumers who will definitely consume a certain volume of grain, which is what the grain ethanol manufacturers provide, it creates a certain price stability also within that market. Now, what we are seeing next is the sort of fact that we are also trying to touch upon today, which is the government also publicly discusses how much CO2 emissions are lowered by ethanol blending, which it has quantified at a certain level due to the volume of ethanol that was consumed. Now, how this will lead to a sort of effective credit or some way of saying that if carbon credits are possible for the ethanol industry, how they will be flowing back to the ethanol distiller or to the farmer or to the oil and gas company. That will be sort of a bit of the discussion that we can have today. Now, as a follow-up with that, there is also a lot of agricultural activity on the crop residues that is developing between Punjab, Haryana, UP, MP, and Delhi, where when the Kharif season ends, when the Rabi season ends, there is a lot of incentive being given to harvest the whole crop instead of picking up, say, the grain alone and then burning the barley and the rice straw. This is also something that we see as a positive step to improving air quality and also creating additional revenue to farmers because the the farmers have a constant concern on MSP and how they get compensated for it. Additional revenue from the crop residue and having the right kind of equipment at the right time to collect it, I think really helps put more income on the table and also the market for it. As I mentioned earlier, will come from the CBG and the second generation ethanol folks who are also buying this. So these are some of the other opportunities also where the ethanol industry can diversify itself to starting to think like a little bit of a biorefinery model where you're using all the biological feedstock to produce refinery grade ethanol gases and even say hydrogen in some cases. So this is the sort of evolution of the sector that would really help sort of shape the Indian energy mix much better. Now, what is the final sort of the bottom line for the country as a whole is that there is a bit of foreign exchange savings that happens from crude oil that we did not buy. So we did not buy crude oil, but we are effectively buying ethanol, producing ethanol and blending it. So there is some savings that come as a result, which also is getting quantified, which is a good sign that it's more money to be spent on how much money that goes to the farmers or how much money that goes to other sectors in the country. So then we have a bit of where this is effectively playing out. So we discussed a few of the achievements or some of the targets that we are trying to achieve year on year. What we are seeing here is how is this positioned in the next few years. So you have a bit of uh, forecast on how many liters of ethanol will be coming in for tendering. So this year we've seen somewhere between 900 to 1000 crore liters that was sort of tendered. Now, hopefully, in the future, with the sort of assumption that 3% petrol consumption grows year on year, Niti Aayog has provided a bit of a forecast on the ethanol tendering. So, why we are talking, I think this is the right place to also discuss. This is almost 400 crore liters is coming from the sugarcane industry, 370 to 400. But the remaining 600, 700 is going to come from the grain ethanol industry only. So we are sort of starting to take over a lot more of the capacity on the table for production of ethanol. So this is where I think these forecasts and the kind of tendering activity from the OMCs are where we really hope that the grain ethanol industry will step up and provide the right kind of volumes to keep this system that has been created operational. Now, what is following is a bit of the investments into biogas also, where we are seeing some companies diversify there. Apart from the DDGS and the corn oil and other options that are there, there are some options involving biogas also. And here comes the sort of the next set of options for the ethanol industry, because the ministry also says that they are interested in aviation fuel. So we are here in 2025, but in 2-3 years, they would like to have some ethanol additional volumes for production of jet fuel, what is used in the aircrafts. Now here, there is a what volume that will effectively consume, and these are still under discussions. But where we are at today with ethanol for petrol, will definitely be followed by ethanol for SAF. And even in the biodiesel segment, there have been some challenges for procuring it. So IOCL is also conducting some research activity on ethanol blending in diesel. So as a sector, we are in the right space. Now, where that additional demand is going to come from outside of the petrol realm, will it be for the next set of SAF plants? Where will ethanol be blended into diesel? If so, at what percentage? How much demand will it create? Because the diesel volume is its own, there is a much larger diesel volume than petrol volume being consumed in India. So this is where we feel that we are in the right space to have a lot of investments coming in for the biofuel segment across this value chain. So we see the ethanol sector as the step one, but the step two, three, four are already sort of there. We just have to find the way to get there. So this is sort of how we also discuss with a lot of the, we hope to also hear from you on some of these topics also going further. Now, the next sort of segment is okay. We have roughly placed the demand, what we showed in the previous graph for ethanol, and how much is going to be blended in petrol. But where is this headed, and how is this sort of being blended? Say we've reached 20%. Is that where it's going to stop? Now, this is where we are seeing that there seems to be some interest in the market to also get a bit of higher blending, say 27%, like how Brazil does it. Now, whether those will come into light, in which case there will be even more ethanol required. That is where we hope that there will be some clarity coming in soon, because what we are seeing here from the goals that were achieved, there is a lot of forex savings coming in, and there is a lot of CO2 emissions being reduced, along with money being delivered to farmers. So there is a lot of need to understand whether we can become a nation in terms of being Atmanirbhar, or finding the sort of strength in ethanol manufacturing and blending. So that is our way forward also, where this was an earlier forecast on only blending in petrol. But now we are starting to see that there are other industries with higher ethanol demand coming in, which will really help us find more opportunities for setting up new distilleries also. Now, the next step is what is actually being reported for being blended. So, ethanol blended under ethanol blending program till say September 2024 was almost say 600 liters. Now, if you check the more recent figure, there's been an update also say in January. But this number is starting to grow, and it is starting to trail this target. So 23, 24, if they say 698, we are already at 607, and as the rest of the ethanol supply year proceeds, we will start to sort of meet the target. So this is where we're seeing that the ethanol industry is an industry that delivers and puts ethanol on the table for blending and oil and gas OMC. So this is where we really find that we are seeing that as a segment, it is a growth segment for a lot of the oil and gas companies also, where they feel that there are issues of probably trucks that are delivering ethanol being decanted at the right time and heading back, but the ethanol industry is able to support with the right kind of volumes month on month. So the next sort of question is on, okay, this is how India is currently working on the ethanol sector. What are the global policies? So what we are seeing is that in countries like US, Brazil, and Europe, there are some policies for ethanol plants that use sugarcane and grain who can sell higher volumes of ethanol and get credits for a certain kind of feedstock. Now, how those markets are structured is what we'll delve into in the next set of slides. And what we are seeing is uh, what does it impact the PSU? How does it impact the PSUs and private companies who are procuring and selling these fuels? So, does it change some of the economics for them? And what does it impact for the vehicle manufacturers? Because with the higher ethanol blends, the operations of the vehicle, the parts of the vehicle, do they require maintenance? So, these are some challenges also that are coming in. And we would like to understand how this was thought about in some of the other countries and who were sort of considered as part of their ethanol or biofuel blending strategy. Now, what we are also sort of trying to see is that the government is now placing a lot of new set of markets, schemes to support companies where they into getting into recycling. So they have sort of placed a lot of regulations for plastics, tires, lubricants. Now, similarly, they have also started to sort of envision a carbon market, which they are trying to sort of structure. So we are therefore seeing that the government has created a certain set of industries that will get a sort of uh, carbon market presence and is able to sell the carbon credits on those markets. Now we are trying to see what would be the best way to get the ethanol industry also included there or under different regimes there. Because as we discussed earlier, the industry is being given credit for emission reduction, but it is not getting paid for it. So whatever emission reduction ethanol blending is causing is with by blending with petrol. If you say I have 100% petrol in an engine and 80% petrol, 20% ethanol, there is some emission reduction that happens. Now the credit for that should be given to the ethanol industry or to the engine manufacturer or to the petrol manufacturer. These are the questions where we feel that we will delve a bit more deeper to understand how the net emission reduction gets valued, because this is a key aspect of saying that if you are able to reduce emissions, there has to be a way to transfer that credit to these companies. So that is the thing. Now, what we can see here, I think different countries have a different model for this. So in the US, they do say 10% ethanol and they generate a number called as a RIN. So we'll dive a bit more deeper into what a RIN is, but it's like a way of saying that a tanker of fuel gets a certain volume of RIN attached to it. Now it's a 38-digit number, and once that RIN is blended in the fuel, the RIN is separated and it goes into a government monitored database for monitoring. So imagine you deliver a volume of ethanol from the distillery to the OMC depot. At the OMC depot, the fact that this volume is delivered is accounted for and reported to a central database where it is kept track of. And that is where they effectively the Environment Protection Agency, EPA as the US call it, maintains an emission tracking database, EMTS database, where they effectively say if this much volume was blended, the equivalent credit for that will be generated. This is one model. So on the left, we have the US model. Then we have the Brazil model where they blend a very different percentage, say much higher than us also. There they have a Renovo Bio program, they call it, which was launched by their effective Ministry for Mines and Energy. And for them, what was sort of evaluated there was that how much volume the biofuel guys are able to produce and how much that is received by the industry is evaluated against a scoring pattern, saying that what is the effective emission reduction for a certain kind of biofuel production and how are these effectively quantified in terms of uh, carbon credit. So then these notes are multiplied by the volume of the biofuel that a company is trading and the amount of carbon reduction that it has. This is effectively put on the stock market though. So what we are doing is we are tracking how much biofuel is getting blended, but the credit and the value of that is put on an open market for bidding. It's not a pricing regulated system like how ethanol is under APM. The carbon credit in Brazil is much more open on a regime. We will delve a bit more deeper in this. Then there is the renewable fuel credits, which are issued by EU, where the automotive manufacturer has to buy the credits because at the end, the onus falls on them for the engine design. So they say that I can give you any sort of fuel, You made the
40 गाड़ी जाएंगे दिसंबर में.
if you have made the engine, then that engine should have a bit of emission reduction capability. So whatever I am having to change on the part of the fuel, the onus falls on the automotive engine guy to effectively make the engine more capable of reducing emissions. This is verified by the EU also through a system. Now, we will dive a bit deeper into the first one on the left, which is the USA based system. So the RIN is a renewable identification number. So it's just a number that says that this fuel is renewable. Now, what we are seeing here is once the fuel is produced and the RINs are generated, the fuel volume, say in a truck or a tanker, and the attached RIN reaches the blender, the RIN gets separated, and then the RIN is retired. Yeah, and then they are filled in between there is an obligation that the blender had to comply with, saying that if I have to buy 100 crore liters, I have bought 10 in this cargo. And then they have an effective way to document this, that once they have fulfilled the RIN obligation, they effectively report this. So there is a trading of the RINs effectively that happens that, okay, across the states and across the different locations in the US, so many RINs were generated in certain regions. And why this happens also is because there is a bit of a corn belt in some regions, the Bible Belt or the corn belt as they call it, where there is a bit of a effective large production of corn. And so in some regions, there are more RINs, and then in other regions, like you go down further in some parts of the US, they have more, say, direct crude oil availability. So they end up. So this is what creates a bit of a difference between different parts of the US, where there is more ethanol production in some states where they can blend higher volumes. And this is an ongoing work in progress even within the US. Because to be honest, we are currently blending more than them per liter of petrol sold. So we are at a very different regime compared to them. But this is one system that sort of they have implemented. The next step is sort of saying what is the RIN life cycle. So once a system like this is put into place, what are the different steps? So once a RIN is generated for a certain volume of fuel that is sort of blended with biofuel, you can buy and sell this RIN exactly to different people in the market. So you can sell it to blenders, you can sell it to renewable fuel exporters, obligated parties. So they have a set of companies who have a interest in buying these RINs. So there is a generation, which is where a lot of, say, the ethanol manufacturers will fall under. But there are a lot of companies who will buy it. And then it is sold. And finally, when the cell is completed, it is separated and retired. So it's a bit of like a token that comes along with the fuel that gets consumed overall. And this accounts for the fact that, say, uh, every distiller is supposed to deliver a certain volumes. It was delivered and recorded. So that is where this system works. And the money sort of flows on when this buy and sell of the RIN happens. So there is someone who buys it and there's someone who sells it. Then when the RIN gets separated, the funds get allocated. So that is sort of how this system works. This is where we see that the US system is working a certain way, which looks similar to how tendering activity happens between BPCL, IOCL, HPCL, and the distillers deliver to them, and the volumes delivered are accounted for. So this is sort of one way this system could probably work. The next system is a bit more open market based, where in the Brazilian context, uh, what we are seeing is there is a definition of CBIO, and I'm not a very good with my Portuguese, so they create a decarbonization credit, which is equivalent of 1 ton of CO2, which was avoided. So if, say, for example, if you have 1 liter of petrol and 80% petrol and 20% ethanol, the effective reduction in CO2 is measured. And this reduction in CO2, if a certain volume of fuel is sold, that creates 1 ton of CO2 reduction. That is the sort of way in which a CBIO is evaluated. So the first set of companies are sort of the companies who produce biofuel, and they create these efficiency notes, which are effectively saying that as a sugar mill or a grain-based company, ethanol manufacturer, I have utilized so much grain, so much energy to produce this 1 liter of ethanol. Now I have blended it in petrol, and the net emission reduction is this. So it measures your energy efficiency of the ethanol production facility, and systematically the government comes and audits these ethanol producers for their energy consumption, their utility bills for water and power, and gives them a value on how energy efficient they are. That is measured against the CO2 that they reduce by the blending, to effectively say that this ethanol plant's CO2 and energy efficiency is X, and the CO2 reduction is Y. So Y minus X is the effective CO2 reduction, which creates a decarbonization credit, which they sell to this on this stock market here. Now, this is something that is being underwritten by investors and individuals, and a lot of funds also choose to buy these, because there are some other segments like oil and gas companies who have to buy this for their emissions. And how they enforce that this buy and sell activity occur is by imposing a penalty and sanction if they do not buy. So this is where there is a bit of a estimation on the overall energy efficiency of the ethanol production, followed by the consumption by the blenders and oil and gas companies, which effectively creates a open market for this CBIO credit that is there. And this is being purchased by companies who have to reduce their emissions. So this is how this system sort of works in Brazil. Now, the next is the EU model. Now, the EU model is a little bit more uh, looking at the vehicle manufacturer, where it says that the fuel supplier sells the fuel of oil type and biofuel type to the distributor, and it goes to the vehicles. Now, the OEM says that I am operating so many vehicles of a certain type. So I am operating so many cars and trucks, which they report to the government there. Now, once that is done and this fuel is blended, they have to report the number of vehicles that are running on this type of fuel to their database that gets recorded. So this is a different model where the fuel effectively that is injected into the vehicle and the annual performance of those vehicles with different types of fuels gets recorded. And this is sort of a way for the vehicle manufacturers to have some equipment or kit in the vehicle to measure how much ethanol that the vehicle actually had blended in it, or how much biodiesel was blended in it. So this is where we are seeing that there are three different regimes which put the way to estimate this with three different set of people. And what we are seeing here is effectively what they are trying to account for in the best way possible is how much CO2 was saved by the use of renewable fuels in with the vehicles. So they're effectively saying, I want to estimate how much CO2 is reduced with a certain biofuel blending. And for that, I will try to do it in three different spots. One at the place where the fuel is blended, one at the place where the vehicle is consuming it, and another system where I say I try to roughly calculate both and give an estimate. So this is sort of how these systems are in place. The next sort of you take a bit of a step back. Who exactly pays for this? And I think this is where the challenge comes in, is saying in the US system, the obligation is on the oil and gas companies to pay for it. In Brazil, it's an open market for credit. So it will be like a stock somewhere on the market that is listed, where the price of that fluctuates based on every season's performance and annual reporting by both sides of the ethanol producers and the vehicle consumers. Then there is a EU-based system where the vehicle manufacturer has to create an ecosystem and credit for it and has to set up the system. So this is where we are seeing three different models, and whichever is easy to implement in the Indian context. This is where we are at currently, where globally something is happening. We have a certain system. How we can find the right kind of parity to build a bridge between these three systems. And I think at this point, I would also open the floor to sort of understand a few views from you before we go a bit more deeper into the carbon credit system, much like an open discussion forum, to say which would you feel would be really helpful. So if I say USA, how many people can give me a thumbs up to say they like that system? I'll just quickly stop sharing to take a bit of a look at this system. So yes, hello. Okay.
Hello.
So if yes, yes. So it's a bit of an open question. I think just instead of me going continuously onto the topic,
We can
I've
actually
shown.
take Q&As from the members that are there. Anyone who like to volunteer and ask a question, please feel free. Hello. Everyone is muted. Everyone is sir. Everyone is
No
muted.
problem.
Everyone is.
No
So
issues.
you can
Now,
go on, sir. We can do the
sure, sure.
Q&As in the end.
Sure, sure. Now we'll come to a bit of why this is really needed, because I think we have seen where a system can effectively play a role in increasing some of the revenues of ethanol companies and different people outside the ethanol industry actually paying for it. Where we see the challenge coming in is that there is a lot of carbon policy developing globally. And there is a way in which there is an exchange traded scheme. So it says that effectively, or an emission trading scheme that comes in. So the emissions that are being reduced have to be traded for. The ethanol industry itself produces some emissions due to fermentation and the CO2 that gets released for every ton of grain that gets produced. What can typically happen here also is that what is the amount of money that you will get for 1 ton of CO2 that you effectively reduce from the market is something that is measured. So this can be one based on the EU system, which is say $60 a ton of CO2. Then there is a bit more on how there is a much lower price, say if you say in the Korean model of ETS. And then there is a
Okay.
way to, yes. So this is what we are seeing, that between the spectrum of say from anywhere between $5 to $60, there is a pricing regime for this per ton of CO2. So the next question comes down to how many tons of CO2 is there abated per liter of ethanol. Now this is where we need a bit of a benchmarking exercise to understand this, because directly coming in and just looking at the ethanol based emission factor won't completely solve the problem until you measure the ethanol distilleries emissions also, that from 1 ton of grain to 1 liter of or one say liter of ethanol, how much emissions happen. So that is where we are currently saying that we are still under a certain evaluation stage where we need to understand the energy dynamics of the distillery itself, say 35 or 36% efficiency for conversion. But what are the emissions that are happening in the distillery also? Now, what can happen is that if this is one segment of how this emissions trading can come into picture, there is a little bit of a carbon tax also that can come in. So this is where we see that there is a lot of interest in some countries where the guys who are buying it have to buy it to avoid sort of taxation. So if you're a coal plant or you're a steel plant which is emitting a certain amount, you have to choose between either of the two prices. So you can either say 60, 65 USD per ton or 60, 65 USD per ton on taxes. So whichever is cheaper for you as a business and whichever is available in the market, they effectively choose to buy to avoid the overall emissions. So this is why there is a bit of a carrot and a stick sort of approach there, where you're either given an incentive to do something. If you don't, there is a penalty that you'll have to pay, which I think is true even for, say, the ethanol companies, where there are a lot of ZLD, zero liquid discharge constraints, particularly for inter-subvention scheme proponents to also comply with. So the ethanol industry is also aware of some of these kind of regulatory systems, where they are also aware that if they use the credits to achieve certain outcomes within the segment, they can escape these penalties, so to speak. The next sort of approach that we are seeing here is what revenues are coming in. The overall demand for if you see the emissions trading scheme gets a lot more revenue that it generates compared to the carbon tax. But what this proceeds go to is where I think we are seeing that a majority of it is for climate and nature and how to reduce the effective revenue in streams that how to increase the revenue streams that you can get for ethanol plant. Because where we are at today and the pricing of the grain that is there and the pricing of the ethanol that is there, there is a bit of a push saying that if I'm currently having a certain margin, but given the rise in grain prices and MSP push, how will that impact the ethanol sector if the grain prices shoot up drastically? Because then there is going to be a need for additional revenue, which can come from DDGS and corn oil and other aspects, but we like to look at it as a way to structure it as a cake. So there are three layers. You have ethanol, DDGS, corn oil, and then carbon taxes will be the or carbon credits will be the cherry on the cake. Now the size of the cherry is what we are trying to also understand here, for which your support and your inputs will be really helpful. Because we really feel that this is something that will help. And now let us understand why there is a need for urgency here. Because what this is effectively doing as a carbon credit generation and carbon taxation and these kind of carbon credits, why does it matter to Indian companies? I think this is where we have a certain regulation kicking in called CBAM, which is a cross-border adjustment mechanism. So it effectively states that if I'm exporting certain products to the European Union from countries like India, it affects my imports because the European, it affects our exports because the European Union says that the certain products have to have a certain carbon reduction. Unless they do that, they will not be able to land on the European market per se. And this affects the steel and aluminum and cement industry. So this is where we see that why they are trying to protect their own market by introducing those emission trading schemes, and they have a market for that. But the ethanol industry is sitting on a large volume of carbon credits which are not monetized currently. If they do monetize it, there are some industries that choose to benefit, and it totally increases India's exports. Because if we take a bit of a step back and look at how much of the export from India goes to Europe, say EU is almost 10%, 9.9% of India's exports. Now, what is the cost that we'll have to pay to send our products there? If we choose to get carbon at, say, 100 euros a ton, it would cost us additional 1.7 billion USD just to, or another, say, 0.05% of its GDP will what we'll have to pay for. So imagine a scenario where I'm exporting goods and now I'll have to pay additional to export it if I don't buy carbon credits. And if those carbon credits are not compliant with what EU says are carbon credits. So this is where we stand at an interesting juncture. This kicks in 2026, and this is where we see that there is a need for CBAM to effectively be addressed. And there are higher level debates at World Trade Organization levels on whether CBAM is even valid or whether it's a good way of how you can regulate itself. Does it violate any rules? But we want to be prepared in every scenario, which is why we are able to discuss this. What is CBAM and how it sort of affects is it's a carbon border adjustment mechanism. We discussed a bit of it, but what it is sort of addressing is there are 56 items of export which are coming under this regime. And the six most carbon intensive sectors, namely cement, steel, aluminum, fertilizer, hydrogen, electricity. Electricity is not something that we export to them, but cement, steel, aluminum, fertilizer are segments where we have a bit of a need for carbon credits. And for this, there is a definite set of regulations that kicks in. So what happens here is there is a phase of CBAM that ends in December this year, 2025. And after that, there is a certain different phase. So there is a free allowance this year. for CBAM, which states that companies that are exporting from here to EU get a certain level of protection until December 2025. And after that, they will be taxed as per the emissions trading system weekly prices. So if I'm exporting 1 ton of steel from India to EU, till December, it will cost me, say, a certain dollar per ton. After that, it is going to increase by almost this price per ton. So $80 or $60 per ton, the price is going to go per ton of CO2. So there is going to be a significant impact to India's exports if CBAM is not complied with in the long term. Now, what we are effectively seeing is, okay, how much of this is actually happening? So we export quite a bit of steel, of say 28.9 million tons of steel was exported in 2022. And a lot of the construction industry in EU is already based there. And this is where we are seeing that the ethanol industry is not only limited to its own realm of fuel and grain, but is also extending to support other sectors in need of such carbon credits like steel sector. And then there is aluminum sector, which is also highly emitting. So if you see the emissions in aluminum, it's even higher than say steel, where 22 tons of CO2 per ton of aluminum is emitted. So that way we have a bit of a need for how year on year our aluminum exports will get costlier for other countries because of these regulations, and that will effectively impact how we can export products to EU. So this is the set of uh, b- these are the set of buyers of the carbon credits, say the ethanol industry can also generate, apart from oil and gas companies who have their own emissions in the refineries and other projects. So you have a vibrant market. But coming to the conclusion, a little bit of a look at sort of where we are and where we are headed. We have a bit of a situation in terms of how the volume of ethanol blended will increase, which is fixed for the petrol case. Any additional increase coming in from SAF and diesel, we will get a bit of a notification on this. Now, this is followed by an increase in, or this is based on the fact that you're able to procure grain and sugarcane. But the cost of producing the grain and sugarcane, as per the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmer Welfare, is growing on an INR per quintal basis. So there seems to be on a base of say in 21-22, if I can produce maize and rice at say 1200 rupees a quintal, that has increased by almost say 200 rupees in 23, 24, 25, and another 200 rupees to say around 230 rupees here for the paddy. So the cost of producing paddy and maize is growing. This is what is being pushed on to the ethanol folks. And that is where all the farmers are also asking for higher MSP. So this cost of producing 1 INR per quintal due to diesel price, labor price, lot of other factors that are considered, that is landing on the ethanol guys in terms of what is the procurement cost of grain. Now, the effective increase in this grain price and the cost of production is not in the ethanol guys' control. So these are farmers who are facing a higher inflation in their economy, and they are pushing those costs to the ethanol guys. And if the additional credits, say in the form of carbon credits, can create more revenue and free cash flow for the ethanol companies to handle some of their other commitments for the debt servicing, for repaying back the loan, for paying farmers. That is where we see that this carbon credit, the cherry on top of the cake, will give you some breathing room to have a lot more working capital when you run a distillery. That is what we are effectively seeing the way forward for how this regulation, if implemented, will create some additional breathing room and a buffer for the ethanol industry. Now, this being said, to give you a bit of status as to why the ethanol industry also stands to be in the future, just a quick look at who all have signed up for the interest subvention scheme. Almost out of this 2,200 crore liter commitment, of 1G ethanol. 1700 is with grain. So upcoming capacity is going to come heavily from grain. So we are at a right juncture where a lot of you are already having ethanol plants, are also looking to add additional ethanol projects. But the demand for the grain is also going to shoot up as a result. So that's why this is an important aspect of how we can try to, as an association and along with support for, we are happy to support you to take things further with the ministry. And we work pro bono with companies, so we don't charge anything. And we work under the Ministry of Commerce to support these companies. So we'll be happy to hear from you on this. And here's the final sort of another development to sort of put some, I think, happy faces on the call to see that there is a lot of export of the DDGS that is picking up. And we are seeing that Vietnam is one preferred destination with higher imports this year. So hopefully, when we connect again, we'll also see that whether the carbon credit system takes a few years to kick in, the DDGS export is already there to sort of keep things going. So hopefully, this is where we see that the revival of DDGS export will really help sort of put the additional revenue there. Yeah. So that is sort of my overview on where we have a lot of discussions on the ethanol sector. Uh, I've seen some of the queries. Over to the folks at GEMA, if you would like to coordinate the rest of the session for the Q&A and also for any discussions on this.
Yes. Sir.
Hi, Karthik, are you trying to speak? I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Everyone is muted now, so Didi, and everyone's videos, cameras are also off. So I was asking members if they have any questions, they can ask now, since the session is almost all over now. But
Mr. Umashankar, the presentation was actually quite informative and a lot of data you shared with us. I think we have a lot of, I think it's a little forward-thinking concept, but we do need to step in waters. I think why we are all a little bit blank, but I'm actually impressed to see that we have some questions on the message board. And maybe since Karthik is anchoring, maybe Karthik, you can read out the questions and have Mr. Umashankar answer them.
So yeah, there's one question. Actually, is not a question. There are two parts that generate carbon dioxide. This has been sent by Abhishek Jha. The power and steam we generate uses coal. So for 250 KLPD, we used around 220 metric ton of coal per day and generate about 100 metric ton of raw CO2 per day. The carbon footprint of a ethanol plant in this scenario is negative. Please confirm our understanding. So this is one question that's been posted by one of our members.
I think they provide a bit of context on if they say they are generating 100 metric ton of CO2 per day,
Yeah.
that is the emissions from the ethanol distillery
Yes.
for just burning the coal. There is a bit of carbon accounting if we can do. Say for 1 ton of grain, after the fermentation, you have to release some CO2. How much of that CO2 stream is there is one stream of CO2 you have to account for. How much of emissions from coal is another CO2 source that you have to account for. If you are buying power from coal-based power plants and not solar or wind-based power plants, that is another emission per kilowatt hour of power that you consume electricity-wise. So these are some of the typical sort of carbon emission calculation for the ethanol plant. Now, under the carbon credit trading scheme, ethanol is currently not in the list, but for the others also, the way this carbon credit is calculated is the same, which they say that there is an accredited carbon verifier. So someone will come and audit the plant's operations, like a carbon audit, to say that input of carbon is so much, your output of carbon is so much. Is it net negative? Which is what this person is also trying to ask. So that versus the carbon emissions from the ethanol being blended. Now, from what the 2, 3 options we have stated here, we have some emissions from the coal. Definitely not negative, but we will get some other factors also together before giving the overall carbon intensity of the ethanol production. And this is what we are seeing as a next step, saying that some companies are there that do this accredited carbon verification to understand the carbon impact of your ethanol production itself. And the companies that are in biogas space are also doing such things. So this is something that they will be the best set of consultants who will audit your plant.
Rekha, you have muted everybody and you have taken away the rights from anybody to. Hi, is everybody able to unmute themselves? Okay, 1 second. I think there is a error. Please allow me to just where is are you able to unmute yourself now?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. I think the new EA, she muted everybody without
Okay.
realizing. Okay. All right. So do we have questions? Abhishek, would you like
Yeah,
to raise a question? Yeah, please go ahead.
we have another question from Kumar Nath Thakur, who's asking if the government is working on providing these carbon credits.
So there are some segments or some industries already eligible for carbon credits, which are sustainable aviation fuel for blending with jet fuel in flights and for biogas. These two activities, if you are engaged in the production of, you are eligible for carbon credits. So there is an article 6.2 which covers a list of 13 activities that can get carbon credits, which is due for renewal in May of 2025. This is a list of activities that the government says are currently eligible for carbon credits. Now, we are hoping that along with the industry representation from both the GEMA and also sugar mills to push the government to say that there are some carbon credit eligible activities in the ethanol sector also, which are reducing carbon emissions. Can they be added to the list, and can those credits be evaluated for sale, and in what system and process? So this is what we are hoping that it will be a good time to intervene as part from the association side and from the members of the association also to represent this to the government. So
So, Umashankarji, Kushal Mittal this side from BCL Industries. Firstly, thank you for your, very valuable insights. I wanted to ask, I don't know if it's related to your expertise, but is GCC currently accepting any more projects, or have they halted the registrations?
sir, you're referring to the interest subvention scheme.
No, for carbon credits.
Carbon credits, sir, this is where if you're working on, so if you're working on the projects like biogas and SAF that are there for carbon credits, you can work on those projects to get the carbon credit. Say the ethanol plant and the SAF plant right next to each other. and alcohol is being converted to jet fuel through isobutanol or isopropanol route, those SAF carbon credits you are eligible for. Or if you
So just to give you an update, we
Huh.
had registered three of our projects under GCC, and
Okay.
the physical verification was also done on site, and this
Huh.
was 6-7 months back, and there
Okay.
has been no progress beyond. And the latest news that we've been hearing is that GCC has stopped registering projects, especially in India because of many issues that they had faced in the previous years where some projects were wrongly registered and carbon credits were wrongly taken. So I wanted to know if you know anything about that.
I would like to understand this a bit deeper. Probably we can connect after the session also to understand what was actually done with GCC. If that is possible, feel free to connect with me after the session to we can understand this a bit more in depth. Because from what we are seeing, there are companies who have done their accredited carbon verification process and then they've gone to Bureau of Energy Efficiency for the carbon market trading of the credit. Now, how they will effectively admit voluntary versus mandatory credits? This is the question that we also want to understand is, are your credits voluntary or mandatory? If they're voluntary, that market is always there. It's mandatory, that is a different market. So would be happy to connect with you offline after this to also get in a bit more of an overview on the steps that were taken by BCL.
Okay, I'll take your contact details and I'll give you a message. Thank you.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
Yeah,
Umashankari,
good,
Village
good.
Mohan Sharma from
As
NSL. When the India has achieved 20% ethanol blending targets, and this has near the maximum because the raw material is limited about the corn, rice, and because the ground, this is limited for agriculture purpose. So, what is the future for emission of carbon in the India? Because the nearby petrol will be used more in future due to the population and other thing. Then there will be future of CBG gas. I think India will go fast for the CBG, yeah, or go to ethanol from the corn. What is
okay.
your opinion?
Sir, we don't see them as competition, number one. The opinion that we share is if you see the number of vehicles on the road that are of two-wheeler and number of vehicles that are of four-wheeler. The development is when the two-wheeler folks buy a four-wheeler. That is when the development is actually happening. तो दो पहिए की गाड़ी से चार पहिए की गाड़ी खरीदे तो विकास. Now, what we are hoping is there will be a big shift in this due to economic activity where the petrol consumption in a four-wheeler also comes up. We are a set of people under the age of 30. So when people get families or get this thing, they shift to having a four-wheeler and things like that. So we see the petrol demand growing. Now, there are some CBG or biogas or natural gas consumption through CNG stations where we see that those vehicles also are petrol plus CNG combination. So both petrol and CNG are needed. So we don't see any sort of dip in petrol consumption, but we see the 3% growth in every year petrol demand is very natural and a part of the way this model is built. And hopefully these two are not competing is the way we look at it because the market is big enough for both to coexist and grow.
But in the ethanol side, it has been nearby the up to the last limit.
Sir,
Or CBG is their scope.
Sir, new CBG projects we are very happy to support, and ethanol also we are happy to support. What we are seeing is now, if you were to go to the banks, the ethanol projects get some amount of credit from banks. CBG projects also get credit because the ethanol industry is so well grown. Ethanol related debt and getting bank loans is easier. CBG, you have to do a bit more justification of your supply chain and how you aggregate that feedstock. The sort of, if you take a step back and think like a bank, the bank says, ethanol guys, I'll give easier credit to, they get tri-party agreements. The CBG guys have a little bit more work to do in terms of getting the biomass and the gas sale agreement. Once they do it, we are happy to support them also. So you're perfectly right that the ethanol industry is growing. The biogas industry will follow next. And we are happy if some ethanol companies also shift to biogas because you have access to farmers. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Uma Shankar ji, Abhishek Jha here from Baidyanath Biofuels Private Limited, Nagpur. We
Yes,
have
sir.
done an initial analysis of carbon credits, and I had posted the query on the chat, wherein with for 250 KLPD, we use about 220 tons of coal per day to generate the required steam and electricity, which is a cogen power plant. And then, of course, the fermentation by itself releases about, I mean, theoretically speaking, 180 tons of CO2, of which we are able to capture 100 tons and convert that into liquid CO2 or dry ice, and that's we are able to sell. So maybe we can still put a story to it that we are able to use that and conserve CO2 from emitting from the CO2, but eventually it is getting into the environment, irrespective of however we take it. But at least put it to some use. But 80 tons of CO2 is not captured, and whatever we emit from the burning of coal is also the CO2. So our initial calculations led us to believe that ethanol plant as such with a cogen power plant is has a negative carbon footprint. So I just wanted to confirm this understanding with you.
Sir, I think this negative carbon footprint calculation, if you can share the calculation with some of the, you mentioned a calculation, but if you can share the details. And why we are openly looking at this is the fact that it's negative and the fact that 250 KLPD of ethanol provides so much carbon reduction versus the emission from your plant and the coal consumption and fermentation CO2. If this balance is negative and that is verified, that can be submitted as part of your audit process for this. The challenge is it will be audited regularly, and that's where you are also asking. The Brazil system is a very clear audit trail where they audit it every year because
Exactly.
yes, so they have some process control equipment like a SCADA system there, like how plants have it, where they monitor the power, the coal consumption, and the energy efficiency of the coal consumption and things like this to monitor there. What we are seeing is if we want some of this carbon credit, there is a bit of a transition cost of investing in these auditing systems and ways to get certified to get it. That is where we hope that once the policy mentions that ethanol industry will get carbon credits, this auditing set of companies will also pick up, like NABL accredited auditors or ACB like accredited carbon verifiers. They have to start auditing the individual plants for their compliance.
So you are saying it's slightly premature?
No, sir. What we are saying is right now, as an industry body, there is a need to push to the uh, government with these sort of representations on the effective calculations so that they include it. Once they include it, there will be companies that will do more of these audits and make it a system. That is the way we see it. Because this same challenge that you are asking, the biogas guys are also asking us, the SAF guys, because they have some 75, 80 biogas plants who are eligible for carbon credits. Even they are trying to say that the number of carbon verifiers is few. Now, what we are seeing is a David versus Goliath battle of say 100 CBG plants, so to speak, roughly, versus the 1200, 1300 distilleries. So if the distilleries get credit, the companies who are verifying this carbon credit will grow in number and make it a smoother process. That is the what we are trying to get happening there. Because if more people are verifying the carbon credit generated or the carbon compliance of the ethanol distillery, it becomes a practice for a set of companies, distilleries, CBG, SAF. They can effectively verify those. So
Fair enough.
but what we really feel will help is if you can also connect with or share this, if it's probable to disclose or the people where they can get their own plants also audited. We really feel that that will help create the awareness for it. Yes.
I mean, we would be open to have our plant audited.
Yes, sir. Very, that is the that's the spirit to take further from here. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Vashankarji, when they are the industry, they are manufacturing the ethanol plant, the CO2 is sale out is must for taking carbon credit or not?
If you make some dry ice or some food grade CO2, you get more carbon credit. If you don't make dry ice and say other uses for the CO2, you get less carbon credit. So it's a choice to say, okay, I will produce some other things and get more credit, or if I'm fine with venting the CO2, venting the coal emission and getting lesser credit. So it's a bit of a accounting of the CO2 to generate a certain volume of emission reduction. That is what they get paid for.
But it is the depend on the market demand nearby the area also. Reason is that.
If correct, you're perfectly there. If there is some food processing company nearby or dry ice company, but I will tell you a bit of context on where the American companies are coming in.
Okay.
In the US, because they have shale oil and gas, they drill lot of wells. So one well or is for 3-4 years.
Ji.
Many of these distilleries are close to some of these extraction sites. The Carbon Capture Institute, CCS Institute, says that these guys are injecting the CO2 into the ground and storing it and generating carbon credit. They don't sell the CO2 to anyone. They just say, I'm not emitting. I put a pipe or I clean the CO2 a little bit from the emission and I send it to the ground. And there are many such distilleries in the US. So this is where we are seeing that in different countries, they're thinking about the same problem in different ways. We are trying to make it dry ice or food grade CO2. In USA, because they have a lot of wells, they are doing carbon capture storage itself. They store it under the ground. So very different thinking is coming in from these locations. Yes. So we are still open to many solutions.
Okay, sir.
Further, any further questions from the members? I think the questions are pretty much done. I can basically share a contact with the members, so whoever wants to connect with you personally can connect. I'll give Rekha ma'am.
Okay,
Rekha
sir.
ma'am already has the number. You can
Yes, sir.
Rekha ma'am can put the number on,
Yes.
and they can connect with sir personally if they want to ask anything else.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I will. I will. We are very
Sure.
thankful to Mr. Uma Shankar, sir, as a valuable knowledge partner. Sir, please accept a token of appreciation from GEMA. This certificate of appreciation will be sent to you by mail. Thank you once again, sir. Good evening, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your valuable insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
You too, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
And also thank you for GEMA and Ayush Jain, ma'am.
Hello,
for
ma'am.
that.
Can
Yes.
can recording of the session? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Can we get a recording of the session?
Sir.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, sir.
Ma'am, can we get a recording of this session?
Yes, sir. You will get it.
Okay. I will
Okay,
share
sir.
my mail ID in the chat box. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Sir, we will send you the recording.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay, sir.
And
Welcome, sir. Welcome, sir. Yes. Yeah.